I am so excited for the next 45 minutes to an hour. We're all super lucky to get to chat with Jay today and pick his brain and find out about his journey. To start off with, you may or may not know, Jay and I are both OG Flinn Scholars. We're from the 1987 crowd, which means we were one of the first ones on that sidewalk up into the
Second
Flinn.
group, right?
You're the second group, exactly. So I don't think I'm old until I went to the art thing last month and realized that there are like decades after us, but we don't care about that. We look young and we act young, so that's all that matters. Jay, in terms of his career, super quick, brief things. We're going to go into this in detail. He's had a few twists and turns, still twisting and turning. I think since he was 30, he's been an entrepreneur, and maybe that's his destiny given his family history, but we want to dig into that a second. He's now, and I'm going to quote this from his website, a business growth and customer experience author, researcher, and advisor. We're going to find out what that means. Even more cool, he's a tequila aficionado, and we're going to talk about that. And if you're under 21 and you on this call, then you have something to look forward to when he gives you the ropes. Now, to me, like in many ways, his profession and his passions are one and the same, and I want to find out how that works for him. But let's start with the entrepreneur side, if you don't mind, Jay. You mentioned
Sure.
to me that everyone can be an entrepreneur. It's not just an innate ability or destiny. So I was hoping you could flesh that out for people here, because regardless if they're alumni or if they're students, I think the topic of entrepreneurship is an interesting one, especially in today's society. So if you could talk about how you made your shift and why from the land of steady pay and flesh out that topic for us, I think it's a great start.
Absolutely. And thanks so much for doing this, Sarah. I appreciate it. Great to be here with everybody. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. My family has been self-employed in some form or fashion since 1842. So I'm a seventh generation entrepreneur. My son is an eighth generation entrepreneur. It was sort of always, I don't want to say expected, but certainly wasn't a foreign concept to me. But I was fortunate enough, partially through some of the contacts I made as part of the program, to have a series of pretty good jobs coming out of school. Although I didn't go to grad school, I got started in sort of real jobs pretty quickly. And consequently, I was like, well, sure, I could start a thing, but they're paying me a bunch of money to do this thing. One of the jobs I had, for those of you from the Valley, I started the website azfamily.com, which is still a very large website. At one point, it was the second largest TV station-based website in the country. And so it was all going great. And I always wanted to start my own thing and felt like that was sort of part of the family legacy, but was essentially afraid to do it. I figured I could do it, but I was just afraid to do it. Like, why take the risk? And so much of entrepreneurship is just risk tolerance. But my best friend at the time, who also married my wife's sister, and so just as an aside, if you can social engineer that your best friend marries, your spouse's relations, it makes Thanksgiving and Christmas a lot more fun. So I really recommend that if you can make that happen. But unfortunately, when we were 30 years old, he was diagnosed with brain cancer at Baer Neurological in Phoenix. And so he called me one day and said, hey, I just got diagnosed with brain cancer. And I went in the next day and quit. And I haven't worked for anybody since that day. It was the push that I needed and sort of the sort of contextual reset that I required to say, what am I scared about? Like, if I go start my own company and it doesn't work out, I'll go get another good job. Like, I've got skills, I've got contacts, I have abilities. What's my true downside here? I realized that, second, my camera flipped off here. What's my real downside here? And I realized that I'd been focused on the negatives instead of on the positives. And once I sort of went through that, it made it a lot easier for me.
Gotcha. So to follow up on you, like you said, it's the risk thing. Is there a type of person that's more likely to succeed as an entrepreneur versus not? Like, for people who are listening, is there like a checklist, or is it an experience situation? How do you evaluate that?
It's both. I mean, there are some people for whom it's just not their bag. And that really does come down, in my experience, into risk tolerance, right? If you do any sort of personality profile assessments, and there are, of course, many of them out there on the market, all of them have some level of sort of risk diagnosis. And some people just, it's just too much like gambling to them, and they just will never do it because it just feels profligate or scary. But I will say this, it is really hard to be an entrepreneur unless you've viewed entrepreneurship. Because entrepreneurship in abstract actually kind of seems better than it is. Like the joke that people say, and maybe some of you have heard this, is entrepreneurship is quitting your 40-hour job to create your own 80-hour job. And there's a lot of truth to that, right? So you have to be around entrepreneurs to understand the pluses and minuses. And I'll tell you, of the things that I've accomplished in my career, probably the thing that I am most proud of is that I think it's 19 people that I have hired across the years in my company that now have their own companies. And not very many of those people set out to be entrepreneurs, but they were in an entrepreneurial environment, and I tend to give people a lot of room to grow. And all of those folks left and started their own company and hired their own people who are now entrepreneurs again. So it's not dissimilar from this program, and how it's almost like a coaching tree, right? You sort of have people who mentor others, and then the next generation. So I think you have to be around it a little bit. You have to be in the same room with entrepreneurship to have the confidence to do it, which is why things like co-working spaces, where I happen to be right now in Mexico, serve a really important function in the entrepreneurship ecosystem.
And I would add to that in the sense of, I think it's true not just in entrepreneurship, but anything that like the world views as a sexy occupation at the time. Just I'd say it doesn't matter how old you are, you don't really know what these different professions or job titles do. And so
Exactly.
when I started off in finance, everybody wanted to be a hedge fund portfolio manager. It was the thing. But like nobody knew what that meant. And when I was around,
Sounds
when I
great.
was when I was doing that job, I spent more time convincing people not to do it than to do it, because they had no idea. Like, oh, it sounds great. It sounds like you could make a lot of money. Most people lose money. Most hedge funds die, blah, blah, blah. So I think 100% I agree with the advice. Be around the people that you want to be and see if that's actually where you want to end up.
And even beyond entrepreneurship, I think I really believe this, and I give this advice to a lot of young people. I always feel like you're going to discover your true path by the process of elimination more so than the process of selection. And so what I always advise people to do is, especially when you're a young professional, like change jobs a lot. Nobody's going to hold it against you. This is the 1950s, right? And figure out what you don't want to do, and be like, never want to do that again, never want to do that again, right? And help you sort of narrow down what you do want to do, because otherwise you have no idea, right? Somebody says, would you like to be a hedge fund manager? I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
What do they do, right? And yes, there's more resources online now, etc., to kind of give you a sense of what it might be like to have that career. You could ask a GPT to tell you what it's like, but that's not living in that world. So unfortunately, my own children are not taking that advice. I'm like, look, you should be changing jobs every 6 to 9 months, and neither of them are, which is endlessly frustrating. But of course, you're never a king in your own castle.
Exactly. Okay, so you've by process of elimination or selection, you've ended up as this business growth and customer experience
Mhm.
researcher and advisor. Can you tell us what the heck that means, and how did you end up doing that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a process. I started, you're talking about this process of elimination. I worked in politics. I was the political campaign consultant. Did a lot of work for U.S. Senator John McCain back in the day, and started. That was going to be my career, was managing political campaigns. And I worked on senatorial campaigns. I worked on his presidential campaign. I worked on governor campaigns in Arizona, a lot of other things. But then I realized, like, that's a really bad job. Like it's not. It's a tough, dirty, bad job. And so we got out of that, and then I got into what we would now consider to be, I guess we'd call it traditional marketing. I was a poli-sci major, but I really had more of a marketing bent. And I worked for Waste Management, the big environmental services company. So then I got experience in a global, at the time, Fortune 30 company, And I realized I don't like that, right? Too much process, too many people. And then I worked for the government for 4 months. I was the spokesperson for the Department of Juvenile Corrections in Arizona. So I got to give a ton of juvenile prison tours, which I also don't recommend as a career path. But I can tell you some stories. Man, I accumulated a backpack of stories in 120 days. But I realized very quickly that government service was not my thing. I mean, it is literally the opposite of entrepreneurship in many ways. So I left there, and I was like, look, I will do almost anything to not give another prison tour. And some friends of mine from U of A had started the very first internet company in Arizona. This is 1993, friends. This is a while back. And we were having some beers, and they said, this company is starting to grow a little bit. We don't know anything about marketing. They're engineers. And I said, well, that's fine, because when we say the word internet, I don't actually know what that word means. Because these are the days, Sara will remember, this is like America Online, CompuServe, Prodigy. And so to be on the real open internet was like super scary, and nobody ever did it. But I said,
you dialed up.
Exactly. And that's what we sold. We sold dial-up internet in Phoenix. But then my partner in that business, I ended up joining the firm as a partner. He invented web hosting. So the whole idea of putting a website online, it used to be you have to have a whole server for your computer, for your .com. And he figured out the partitioning algorithm to put more than one .com on a single box. First ones in the world to do it.
That's
cool.
So
the company, yeah, it was crazy. So the company took off, and we had all these clients. It was a wild ride. And then I got hired away by Channel 3 television to start their whole internet empire. But when I started, here's how long ago it was. I tell this story on stage a lot. Domain names were free. You could get whatever domain name you wanted, because why would anybody want to have a website? So I was 23. We registered Budweiser.com, Guinness.com, Beer.com, all of these.
Tell me you got Apple.
We did not have Apple.
That would have been bank, yeah.
We sold Budweiser.com to Anheuser-Busch, who were the owners at the time, in 1993 for 50 cases of beer.
Ah!
That is a true story. Our whole office was on 12th Street and Thomas in Phoenix, right by the foundation. Our whole office was full of beer. And the best part about that story is we literally had a professional attorney write this contract up. And it said, bottles, not cans. Because, you got to keep it classy. Like, we're not taking cans, guys. So it's been a long time. And so I've only made 2 good decisions, really, in my life. One, convincing my wife to marry me, and it was the hardest I've ever worked at anything, literally. And then 2, to get involved in the internet at the very, very, very beginning and never really get out. From there, I started a whole series of digital marketing and online consulting firms based in Phoenix, and then moved here to the Midwest, not here, but where I typically live in the Midwest in Indiana 15 years ago. And had a global consulting firm working with tons and tons of very large companies all over the world on social media strategy, content marketing strategy, digital strategy, and that evolved into work in sort of more of a pan customer experience way. So how do we make businesses easier to do business with? Because that keeps your customers in place and actually acquires you more customers as well. So I had a whole group of consultants all over the world doing really high level work. We used to say, like, we're McKinsey, but still fun, was sort of our positioning. And I ran that company for a long time, and we sold it a few years ago. But along the way, I started to write books, and I've written 7 books now, and became a speaker. So I spend most of my time now talking about tequila and then giving speeches. So I've done 1,300 paid keynote speeches in the last 15 years. So 50 or 60 a year. So every week I'm somewhere in the world giving a speech about business.
So, like, you're obviously, well, to me, the living embodiment of a personal brand, like all the way down to that look that you do.
Yeah, as a speaker and as an author, that part of the business, it's really critical, because meeting planners, they talk and they hear it from other people, and it's got to be a consistent message, and it's got to be an approach that people can resonate with. If you've got a huge sort of grab bag of looks and topics and vibes, it just confuses the audience. And so you sort of have to stick to a shtick, if you will.
Can you, yeah, I think that maybe we mentioned this, or I just wanted to ask you generally, but like, can you describe, because not everybody is in the realm of understanding what a personal brand is, and why should every single person on this call, every single alumni, because I believe this is true, tell me if you don't, every person should have an interest in having identified their personal brand. What would they use it for, whether they're at home or they're doing your kind of job?
The personal brand is essentially what people say about you when you're not in the room. I think that's the easiest way to describe it. And those attributes, those criteria, those elements of what you know and who you are naturally hang off of you like a Christmas ornament. And those ornaments are what people, especially as you get into your mid-career and later, that sort of personal brand is in many cases what takes you to the next level or the next opportunity. Because pretty quickly as a professional, people don't really care about your CV per se, right? Like there's a people talk about you and they have a sense of who you are and what you've done, and that's more of a word of mouth scenario than it is like just read the resume. And so personal brand is essentially personal word of mouth. And it is incredibly important. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in or what profession you're in, having a consistent approach to what you stand for and how that works with other people in your profession is really critical.
So, I mean, if you were advising, and tell me if it's different, if you would answer this differently for someone who's like, 18 to 30 versus someone who is 40 and above, or even in between, whatever demographic age-wise you want to talk about. But like, what would you say would be 3 core action points that people listening here should take to establish or improve their personal brand?
I mean, the first thing you got to do is identify, what do you stand for, right? What is, you think about all the things that could be part of your personality, part of your personal brand. You have to kind of understand, like for me, I'm the very honest, somewhat humorous, very entrepreneurial, innovative guy, right? That's kind of my thing, right? But then you have other dimensions of that too that I'll talk about in a moment. So you first have to sort of understand what it is that you stand for. And obviously that gets a little easier as you get older, because when you're younger, sometimes you don't even know what you stand for yet. That's okay. But eventually you have to say, all right, this is the lane I'm going to try and stay in. And then you have to actually set aside time to work on it, right? It's just like going to the gym. You have to say, all right, on a regular basis, I'm going to create assets that prove to the world that this brand is accurate. Because the worst thing you can have is an inaccurate brand, right? People understand falsity and incongruence very easily now. And so you have to say, all right, I'm going to try and support these ideas through my work. And typically, the way that manifests, Sara, is with some kind of content creation. You mentioned before we rolled the cameras here that you've started a blog recently, right? That's a perfect example of how you might manifest a personal brand, or social media content, or consistent volunteer. It doesn't have to be online. You could be volunteering in your community, or any number of ways to do it. But it's actions that support the words that you have chosen to describe you to the outside world.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we follow that up, like as my daughter's company, we've had to deal with branding, and I would throw this in anecdotally, is that, as we were growing our company, we wanted to be sure that we had a consistent brand inside and outside, from how the team members felt about us and how outside people. And you can find that out, just as a person, like, it's a growth thing. A lot of coaches tell you, go call your friends and ask them to give you 3 adjectives. Yeah. How do they describe you? I think this is, besides fun, because it's really fun to like hear how people think about you. And then you realize as well, like, oh wow, she thinks I'm like
Yeah, I
really
don't know. I don't know
quiet.
if I'd use that word. I don't know that it's fun. I think it's actually terrifying, personally. But
Well, yeah, it definitely can be terrifying, but I think it's fun because sometimes you uncover something that you don't even know you were putting off, so it's, I guess you can call it a growth opportunity for sure.
yes, definitely.
But I think starting off with, especially like I have my son is in his 20s and figuring out who he is. And that's, I think, whether it's me and what am I going to do when I grow up at age 55 versus him, is like having that kind of mission statement, like, well, actually, I really want to be an authentic person, or I really want to be a, public speaker. I mean, it can be what kind of adjectives go along with those, I think are important to investigate.
Yeah, and some parts of personal branding really require you to acknowledge that your passions are just as important and probably 10x more memorable than your profession. Now, there's a lot of people in the Flinn organization that are super impressive and doing amazing work. But most of the time, that's not really the thing that people are going to remember. And so the example I like to use is if you are a realtor, I don't think there's anybody who is in real estate in the Flinn organization, but I could be wrong. But let's just use it as an example because everybody knows what realtors do. There are a lot of realtors, right? Like so many, 50,000, I think, in the US or more. And functionally, they all do pretty much the same thing, right? That's an overstatement, but I've done a lot of real estate presentations, and it's all more or less the same thing. And so how do you stand out? Like, I buy and sell houses for people the same way everybody else does. But if you're the realtor, and this is a real person in Tacoma, Washington, who is all about skydiving, and you've got, that your business card is a piece of a parachute, and your website has pictures of you skydiving, over for sale signs, et cetera, like, people are going to remember you as the skydiving realtor more than they're going to remember you as a realtor in Tacoma. And so often I've worked with so many executives on personal branding, and so often they're like, well, that's just foolishness. That's just silly. That's just my hobby. Nobody wants to hear about my hobby. I'm a nuclear engineer. It's like, no, because you're a nuclear engineer, the one thing they don't want to hear about is nuclear engineering. But the fact that you grow prize-winning roses, or you make your own sausage, or in my case, you're the #2 tequila influencer in the world. Look, you know how many times meeting planners call me now and say, yeah, we know you're good on stage. We've heard that from other people. But the fact that you're the #2 tequila influencer in the world, that's amazing. Can we talk about that? Like, that's the thing that people actually remember. And I've written 7 books that you can go get on Amazon right now, and people care about me talking about tequila more than they talk about books. I get recognized in planes and hotels all the time now, 100% for making tequila videos. Exactly. Nobody cared about the 1,300 speeches or the 7 best-selling business books or or being a strategist for 30 years. Don't care. You make some tequila videos, they're like, tell me more about tequila. It's amazing.
Exactly. And I mean, I would just, to wrap up this topic, it matters, like, even in whether you're a big corporation, like, where's a personal brand? Like, I mean, you're looking for promotions, you're looking for, recognition. I mean, if you're one of a crowd of 30 analysts that are all producing really high quality research, how do you stand out? You stand out being the one who has an interesting thing to talk about, at the happy hour. So, and same thing with resumes. I've interviewed so many people and received so many resumes, and what helps me is the interest thing at the bottom of the resume. Like, oh, that person does X, Y, Z. That's how I remember that. Oh, when you ask the team, like, who'd you like? Oh, we like the skydiver. That's how.
Yeah, it's just shorthand. Just shorthand.
Yeah. So super important. So 2 things I want to hit up before I make myself stop talking and see if anybody else has questions. I want to talk about book writing, and I want to talk about tequila. So first of all, book writing. I'm sure a lot of people in the Flinn sphere have thought about writing books, or have written books, or scared about writing books, or like they don't even know how to approach it. Do you have any targeted advice for people who want, in this day and age, with self-publishing, with publishing, all that, if they want to, maybe they have a motive to make money, maybe they just want to use it for personal brand, maybe they don't even know why they want to write a book, but feel like they should. How should we think about book writing, especially in the nonfiction space right now?
Yeah, I think nonfiction is the only one I have any license to speak on. I don't know much about fiction writing and how the economics of that business works. Let me disavow you of the notion that writing books makes money, because it really doesn't. Like, I've got New York Times best-selling books, and I don't know what I've sold, probably 150,000 books, probably more than that, probably 250,000 books total. And the problem is, you put all your money that you make on the book back into marketing the book, right? This is not a business model that you want to pursue. So you have to think about, and I ask people this all the time who ask me questions about books, like, okay, why are you doing it? Is it because you just feel the need to get what you know on page? That's cool, good enough reason. Is it, in my case, the way I do it, like books create speaking opportunities. So the same way that a new album creates more tour revenue for a band, like the speaking and writing business is very similar to the music business. Like I've got two different agents, one for speaking, one for writing, in the same way that a band would have. Every time there's a new book, now you sort of go on tour behind that book. It's the same idea. And so the book is just a conduit to more speaking, which is where the money is really made, at least in my world. So you gotta understand why you want to do it. And then realistically today, like, could you go get a major publisher to carry the book and get a book deal? Theoretically, yes, but the business has changed so much, even in the 15 years since I started writing books. Nowadays, their risk tolerance is so low that unless you can essentially prove that you're going to sell 10 to 15,000 books, the answer will be no. It doesn't matter what the book is, it doesn't matter. And today, the hybrid publishers, which are the ones where they basically they charge you to make the book. So they might charge you $20,000 and they'll help you write it, design it, edit it, market it, create it. And then you keep a higher percentage of the royalties than you do if you're with a publisher. It used to be that those hybrid publishers were sort of viewed as vanity, right? That's like, oh, this guy just like made his own book because he just feels like you should have a book, and like nobody cares, it's not credible. That's not true anymore, right? It used to be like, if you're with one of the major, global publishing houses, your credibility, even with the journalists, was here, and anything that was self-published or hybrid publishing was here, and that distinction is no longer true. So most people now, at least in the business and nonfiction space, will pursue a hybrid publishing or a self-publishing model, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so last thing on tequila, and then everyone get ready if you have any questions. I'll give up some of my time. Tequila. So as you went into, I mean, you obviously are passionate about it. I'm curious about, like, what is your unique perspective and competitive advantage in this space? And when you started really, focusing time and energy into it, were you intending to monetize it, or just to get free tequila, or just have fun? Like, tell us a little bit about the path there.
So I'm from Arizona, obviously, and we're just going to Tucson. So I spent a lot of time in Nogales as a freshman and sophomore, because that was the thing to do in my day, is you go across the border, and have always sort of been enveloped in the cross-border culture. When I was in my mid-20s, before we had kids, I used to go to a restaurant in Scottsdale. It's still there, called Los Sombreros, and I would go every Wednesday, maybe it's Tuesday, with a very good friend of mine, and we would go, and there's a bartender there who was really into mezcal. Like, this is obviously 30 years ago, way before mezcal was popularized in the US at all. And we would just sit there and be like, okay, church is in session, teach us a thing. And so he would like tell us these enchanting tales of, these, artisanal spirits made by these legends in a tiny town with no electricity. And it was just incredible. And so over the next 3 decades, I spent more time learning about agave spirits, and spent more time here in Mexico visiting palenques and distilleries and meeting people, and reading everything I could read. And it was always just really a hobby in the background. And then when I sold my company a few years ago, I had some more time on my hands, and I thought, I've never really done any short form content. I've done books and a lot of podcasts and a lot of blog posts, but I've never really done like chunky, like short form content, TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts. And I'm like, well, it'd be interesting to learn how that works. And maybe I could just teach somebody something about what I've learned about tequila. So I made like a video, sucked, made another video, sucked, made like 10 more, not very good. But then you start to figure it out, especially because I've been creating content episodically for 20 years. and got better. And now I have a business partner who's on camera with me, Maddie. And one of the things you talk about differentiation, I'm the same age as her dad, right? So it's almost like a father-daughter combo, even though we're not related. So that's kind of a fun, dynamic on camera. And then my piece of that game is I'm the tequila guy who actually understands business, right? So just yesterday, I talked about tequila's growth versus whiskey and vodka and kind of the projections around that. I did a video 2 weeks ago about the impact of tariffs on tequila pricing. Now, we also do frivolous stuff like best tequilas to drink on a ski trip, and we rate and rank and review new tequilas that come out. So it's a lot of different types of content, but we have a very specific strategy for our audience, which is we want to be the person that introduces you to good tequila or takes you to the second level. There are other content creators in my world who really operate at this level, right? It's essentially nerds talking to nerds, and that's not there's not enough of them, right? Here's how I actually did the strategy, if you want to know, Sarah. So there are 40 million Americans who will have at least one cocktail that contains tequila in the next 30 days, right? So your total addressable market, your TAM, is 40 million. There is an app called Tequila Matchmaker, which allows you to rank, rate, and review tequilas. There's similar apps for beer, Untapped, Vivino for wine, et cetera. You may be familiar with this premise. Tequila Matchmaker, which is sort of the playground of the nerds, has 400,000 users ever. So when you're starting a project, do you want to try and reach 40 million people or 400,000 people, right? And so that's why I don't want to say we dumb our content down, but our goal is to never overshoot the audience's level of comfort and knowledge about tequila and agave spirits, because once you start to intimidate them with your own knowledge, then they go find somebody else's videos to watch.
Yeah, that's super, super interesting. Okay. I know I'm a whiskey person and a wine person, so I'm asking this knowing alcohol, but knowing the answer is it depends. But for those of us who say are middle of the road tequila drinkers and we go into, medium to okay, let's put it this way. We go into a dive bar versus we go into a nice bar. What's the go-to tequila that we should be looking for in each case? Is there one?
Okay, a couple of options. In a somewhat dire scenario, right, where it's only going to be the big grocery store brands.
Yeah.
Patron is the best one. It's the best made. Yeah. It's better than Don Julio. It's better than Casamigos. It's better than any of the big brands. It's the best made. They've got the best corporate values. It's very neutral, right? It doesn't have a lot of flavor. It's by design. They actually shave the piñas very differently to keep it neutral. But Patron is the best of the big ones. Beyond that, when you get a place, and luckily Arizona is replete with great agave. It's one of the best tequila markets in the country. There are brands like G4, which is a really good tequila on the up and coming.
We all taking notes here.
Tequila Ocho.
Your friends.
Tequila Ocho is a really great brand and also growing very quickly, and you can see it in a lot more places. Probably those two, I'd say, are going to be, you're going to find them more places. So Ocho and G4, and then Patron. But if you want to really get into the weeds, if you go to jtequila.com, Jay tequila.com, it'll ask for your email address, and then I'll send you instantaneously our list that we made of the 83 brands that we recommend. So people keep it on their phone, and then if they're at a bar, restaurant, store, scenario, party, they just pull out the list like, yep, Jay thinks this one, and just shortcut. Because there are 2,500 brands right now.
So if we want to look really cool,
crazy competitive.
Say we're like around someone who's like thinks they're everything and they're super cool, and we want to look cooler than them and say, oh, well, have you tried this such and such tequila? What should that be? What's our name tequila?
Okay, so yeah, the name dropping one is actually ironically not even a tequila, because they actually left the regulatory body because they got BS.
Even more obscure, better.
It's called, I put it in the chat, it's called Caballito Cerrero. And Caballito Cerrero, it's an amazing, amazing brand. Check this out. I was there not long ago at the distillery, and it's in the middle of nowhere. Like, I can't even tell you how in the middle of nowhere it is. They've got a family tree on the wall of the distillery. And it goes back to the founder of the distillery, 15 generations.
Wow. Okay.
Family owned for 15 generations.
That's
Yeah,
super cool.
it's pretty great.
Okay, guys, start throwing your anybody have questions? You're welcome to raise your hand if you want. Otherwise, just throw it into the chat. And I'll get my next one teed up because, you know, I've got another 30. So we're okay. If no one has anything.
I'm going to jump
But
in about 10 minutes, Sarah.
okay. I will.
Personal mantra, great question, Gayatri. So yes, and it's actually, I'm not in my regular office today, but in my office at home, there's a sign and it's right above my monitor. So I look at it like all day. My mom got me this sign when I first started my first company, again, 25 years ago. And it says, remember, some days you're the pigeon and some days you're the statue. And I really, really like that because it's proven so true in my career. Like it's never going as good as you think it is. And it's never going as bad as you think it is. And if you can just, I know it's hard, but if you can just kind of keep it even keel, you will be much more centered emotionally, which will serve you well.
Yes, a little derivation of that is, do you have any methodology that you rely on to make decisions, especially important decisions? Or do you go with the flow, or is it?
I am definitely more of a field player. Yeah, I do not do a lot of decision matrixing. I sort of feel like, especially now, I've been doing this long enough that my instincts are pretty good. But I will say that I have discovered in the last, say, maybe 5 years that my instincts aren't always as good as I think they are, right? And I'm trusting collaborators more than I ever have. And at first, that was really scary for me because I've been the boss for so long that to say, you know what, you make all those decisions and whatever you come up with is fine, was a little bit paralyzing, but it's actually been really freeing and turned out to be a really good decision. So, yeah. Taylor's got a great question. Have you ever had to rebrand your personal brand? Yeah, funny story. So, for speaking, for a long time, my personal brand was and still kind of is as a secondary, tertiary component, plaid, right? So I have 17 plaid suits. You may see it on my website, and every color of the rainbow, right? So a closet full of custom plaid suits. And it used to be that when somebody booked me to give a speech, they would go to a special website I built called dressjbaer.com. And they would have all the suits lined up and they could pick which color they want. And they would actually automatically go on my calendar so I knew what to pack. And then sometimes meeting planners would pick out their favorite three and then let the attendees vote, like what should Jay wear on stage? Just so that like everybody was part of the bit. It was great. Well, then the pandemic happened and I gained like 20 pounds. And so of the 17 suits, I could only wear like 5, which wasn't much of a choice, right, for the meeting planner. So I had to kill that personal branding element. Ironically, that's about the same time that we started the tequila business. So now the tequila side hustle is the most memorable part of the personal brand.
That's hilarious. It's almost like the influencers who, I mean, it's been a very popular trend, maybe it's last year or something, like they run the live chats on Instagram and they say, oh, which one would you like me to try on? Which makeup do I want to go here? Like giving people agency in your outcome is a very popular thing.
It's really powerful. Yep.
What, like, digital trends and obviously AI, everything's happening so fast. Do you have any habits or practices that you rely on to stay current or ahead of the curve? Do you think it matters? How are you factoring in AI to any of your choices right now?
Yeah, I mean, we use AI a lot in the company, more for content creation and decision support, analytics as well, and just saving time with things. I do a fair amount of speaking on AI now, and sort of AI's role in business. To me, the ability to make things faster is interesting, but will not prove to be transformative. To me, there's 2 big impacts that AI is going to have. One is it is already happening, is changing customer expectations. So everybody's going to expect everything faster because AI makes it faster, and everyone is going to think of everything, going to expect everything to be more personalized because AI makes bespoke anything much more viable at scale. So the customer expectation curve is going to bend upwards, which is a tremendously difficult assignment for business, because at some level, consumers are going to start adopting AI faster than businesses can adopt AI. And so there's going to be an expectation lag, and that is going to disappoint a lot of customers. That's really challenging. I do a lot of consulting, a lot of speaking around that premise. The second thing that I think is really important to pay attention to is that AI will not be a competitive advantage very long. Today, literally today, it is. Like, you can be better at AI than your colleagues. You can be better at AI than competitors, than other companies in your industry. But that's not going to last, because eventually AI will be baked into everything, right? It will just be like, right now it's water. You have to go to a river, you have to go to a lake, you have to go to the ocean. AI will be air. It will just be around us all the time. You won't have to venture to it. It will be here, just omnipresent. And in that scenario, when everybody has the same robots, right? You got robots, I got robots, we all got robots. The robot is no longer a differentiator. It's no longer a competitive advantage. So what will be the competitive advantage is this. And this is the question I ask on stage a lot. You need to be thinking right now, not how do you use AI? It's all going to solve itself. It's what are you going to do, both as a person and in your business, with the 25% time you're going to get back? That's the real question, right? If today it takes you 50 hours to do a thing, right? And in 6 months, it takes you 38 hours to do that thing. The real question you should be asking is, what does that 12 hours mean? And how you use that time, how you press that advantage, is going to be the thing that separates winners from losers in the next era. But that next era is going to start in like 2026. So start thinking about it now.
And if you're in college, do you feel like, are you worried about any certain types of careers or professions? I'm not so worried about Flinn Scholars, but
like all careers and professions are going to be disintermediated, like all. STEM is actually one of the most at-risk professions, ironically, right? Because you can program AI to do a lot of the STEM blocking and tackling. Law, disaster, right? Marketing,
financial analytics.
Financial analytics. Like my daughter's in content marketing. I'm like, okay, I could literally. She lives in Paris, right, which is 2 years behind the U.S. in all things. Like, if she lived in the U.S., I could have a GPT do her job at tomorrow, right? So, yeah, it's. I do not envy folks who are in school right now or just out of school, because there's so much disruption on the horizon. It's hard to know like what direction to turn, because the world is like changing in real time in a way that it hasn't, people say, since the invention of the internet itself, but I was there and it didn't happen with this kind of speed. Trust me, right? We had more time to see the boulder coming down the hill than people do right now with AI. So I wish I had brighter advice, but I think that what I would say is, spend as much time as you can stomach just screwing around, right? The best way to master AI is to just mess with it. Like, I wonder what happened if I did this. I wonder what happened if I did that. What if it happened? I just mess around with it is the best practice, actually. And then, especially right now, I think you've got to be as flexible as possible with your career path, because the career path that you pick may not actually exist in 2 years. Also, now is that understand the limitations of models. I think limitations of models collectively, yes, for sure. Especially in an enterprise setting, right? When you're thinking about, okay, we've got security, privacy considerations that a smaller business may not have. Absolutely. Is it knowing when to use Llama versus Gemini versus DeepSync? Is that a competitive advantage? Yeah, for 90 days, right? Like, people are going to be able to figure that out, and it'll probably be auto-selected at some point for us anyway. In terms of like core AI skills, the one to ride right now, like literally jump on the train, is agentic AI, right? It's figuring out how to build AI agents, deploy AI agents to do the work of humans in multi-step complex processes, where you just say, hey, agent, book me a flight to Puerto Vallarta, and that's all that's all you have to say, right? That is coming very, very quickly. That is going to change the world as we know it. So there's still also some competitive advantage opportunities in that flavor of AI, in my estimation.
I'm going to just underscore your comment. I'd spent a lot of time on AI myself, and I think the number one thing to do is, like you said, use AI as much as you can, and getting in. Like, I have kind of lived by a motto for years that can morph to anything, which is just ask. And
Yeah.
so I suggest that every single thing you do during the day, and I beat this to everybody, is like, just ask. Well, in this case, just ask, could I be using AI to do this next thing? And then try it. And then you'll learn how just, I think, understanding how AI works, even if you're not a scientist or not a LLM programmer, you'll start getting into the vibe of how it works. And so then as it shifts through time, you're predisposed to understand how to use it in the next phase. So
And
ignoring. Okay.
ironically, you can actually use AI to teach you how to use AI, right? Which
Mhm.
feels very inside baseball, right? But one of my favorite things to do is to ask an AI tool, how can I best use AI tools? Uh,
Mhm.
and it's awesome. Like it's amazing. Like, oh, what you could do is this, and this. I'm like, oh, awesome, thanks.
And then you can just follow it up with it. It's like being a 3-year-old. Why? How? How?
Right.
How?
They,
And they'll
they
just
go
keep
ahead and
on
do that.
answering. How? Wait, how? You know.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Well, I think we're hitting the limits of everyone's time. I had a blast. I hope you guys enjoyed it.